Well, good morning, friends. I am Pastor Michelle at Harmony Creek Church, and this is my sermon for September 21st, and it is all about the parable of the dishonest or shrewd manager. So let's hear this passage from the book of Luke, chapter 16. Then Jesus said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and said to him, 'What is this I hear about you? Give me an account of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer.' Then the manager said to himself, 'What will I do now that my master is taking the position away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do, so that when I'm dismissed as a manager, people may welcome me into their homes.' So summoning his master's debtors one by one, he asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' And he answered, 100 jugs of olive oil. He said to him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 50. Then he asked another, 'And how much do you owe?' He replied, 100 containers of wheat. And he said to him, 'Take your bill and make it 80. And his master commended the dishonest manager, because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourself by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much, and whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest also in much. If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful for what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." So I really like this story because I find it very challenging, right? Because what is going on here? What's going on in this parable? Because this isn't a parable that's easy to understand. It's not similar to the parable of the lost sheep, which I preached about last week, the found sheep, as I called it. It's not similar to the parable of the prodigal son or the good Samaritan. It's not similar to the parable of the lost coin. Last week, we kind of focused on the parable of the lost sheep, which is found in the lost and found chapter, so to speak, of Luke chapter 14, where the lost and found parables are found. So what did Jesus want his followers to learn from this parable about a dishonest, or as I like to say, and as I will say it today, a shrewd manager? And I think it's important to talk a little bit about the context of Luke's narrative world, the context of Jesus's world, and even have a mini course on the economics of Roman-occupied Galilee in the first century. These are going to be things that you are going to find out about if you don't. And you didn't ask to find out about it, but now you will know some about what the economics was like back then. So one scholar had this to say about the economics of Jesus' world. Rich landlords and rulers were loan sharks, using exorbitant interest rates to amass more land and disinherit peasants of their family land, in direct violation of biblical covenantal law. The rich man, along with his steward or debt collector, were both exploiting desperate peasants. Throughout the Gospel of Luke, Jesus' ministry invokes the biblical concept of jubilee and debt forgiveness. Economic restitution is even part of the joy of Mary's Magnificat. Jesus' hearers would know that the debt contracts included exorbitant interest hidden from illiterate peasants. Wealthy landlords in Jesus' day created ways to charge interest under other guises, often hiding interest by rolling it into the principal. When he reduced the payments, the manager may have been simply forgiving his own cut of the interest, or he may have been doing what the law of God commands, forgiving all the hidden interest in the contracts. If the rich landlord was not a Gentile, and it's not clear in the text, but if he was a Jewish man, he would know the Torah teaching against interest. So the rich man, suddenly recognizing that he needed to at least appear to be observing covenantal laws, he commended his manager, end quote. So that's one understanding of the economics of that time, one way that we could get a little bit of grasp on what exactly this parable is about. The thing I want to point out, and I will bring it up again, but What I appreciate about this story is when we hear about what economics was about back then, we hear that the manager, this manager who gets fired from his position, decides to make a difference before he's out of the position. He makes a difference in some of the people who were in debt. He made a difference in their lives. He was doing something he could do. He was figuring out a way to help, even in a corrupt and broken system. And I love this line, and it's been sticking with me all week. He was trying to set things right, even if he had been complicit in setting them wrong. And more on that in a moment, because there's something there, right? And yes, maybe he does so by being dishonest. And he does so in a very Robin Hood type of way, right? Robin Hood, I think, was also a very shrewd character, just like the manager. And just a side note, in English, shrewd might not be the most positive way to describe someone. But in Greek, shrewd translates as being wise and practical matters. So we think about Robin Hood, who was very shrewd, who was very wise. Robin Hood, he saw an unjust system. He saw that wealth concentrated in the hands of corrupt rulers while common people suffered. Something still going on today. Robin Hood used strategy to redistribute wealth. Though outside the law, he acted with a sense of higher justice, caring for those overlooked. So like Robin Hood, the manager in our story wasn't just looking out for himself, I don't think. By reducing debts, he gave people a taste of liberation and fairness. So both the shrewd Robin Hood and the shrewd manager recognize that power and wealth can be tools for justice. Because like Robin Hood, the manager knew the system was rigged in his time. The manager recognized that. And I think Jesus wanted us to know that in this parable. The manager knew that wealth and power were concentrated in the hands of the few, and he knew he was about to be cut off because he was getting ready to lose his job. So he acts creatively using what little leverage he had to build relationships and secure a future. He bends the system to care for himself, and in the process, he relieves the burden of debt from others. Now, I want to point out that I don't think that Jesus is condoning dishonesty here. But what Jesus is doing, I think, instead is inviting us to pay attention to this manager's resourcefulness. The manager uses his position, even though it was not about to be he was fired from that position, but he still had some time. This manager uses his position, imperfect as it was, to imagine another way forward. So maybe Jesus' challenge in this parable, the challenge for his first century followers and for us today is this. If even someone caught in a corrupt system can figure out how to work for their survival and find a way to work for justice, how much more can we, modern day followers of Jesus, be creative, bold, and persistent in working for God's justice, in working to bring about as much heaven on earth as possible. But let's face it though, right, friends? Working for justice, trying to create a better world, is very, very hard work right now. Especially in the times we find ourselves living in. Because friends, we too are caught in a corrupt and broken system. We too live in a world, specifically in a country, where the majority of wealth lie in the hands of the few. We live in a world where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. We live in a world where those in power profit off the powerless. We live in a world that is not that much different from the world of first century Galilee. And so I think maybe like the manager in our parable, and even like Robin Hood, we too have to be creative to take what we've been given, our time, our money, our privilege, our influence, and use those things in ways that continue to challenge injustice, that continue to work to bring about a better and more just world for all. But this isn't easy. And I'm not sitting here telling you to go and do illegal things in order to fight for justice. But we do need to be shrewd and wise in what we do. And this work isn't easy. It's not easy in a world where the cards seem stacked against us. But let's consider these two examples, though, of modern times when people have used their resources to make a difference. So the first example, so several weeks ago, the former chaplain for Cincinnati Children's Hospital, Amon Solomon, was detained by ICE and he was put into custody. For many weeks, he was held in jail in Butler County, along with others. Even when our hands might have felt tied, clergy and other leaders in the community rose up to speak out against this injustice. They rose up to speak for Amon. You see, Amon was here in our country legally, but yet he was still detained, as I said, along with several other legal citizens. Solomon came to the U.S. from Egypt in 2014, and he was granted asylum. He was granted asylum in 2018, but back in July, he was detained by ICE agents during a check-in after his asylum was revoked. So crazy. But what happened next, people came together to stand up and fight for Amon. And the good news is that he was recently released. And I think this example shows that it takes a village to fight against injustice. It takes a village to fight for those who can't fight for themselves. I think this example was a way that people were able to get creative in how they were going to work for injustice, even in a system that's stacked against us. Now, the second example illustrates, I think, the importance of having a village as well. And so I think back to what we did here at Harmony Creek Church in January when our church hosted the Right to Love event. This was an example of us practicing holy shrewdness, as I like to say, getting into holy shrewdness trouble. And we didn't do this alone. It took a village to pull this event off. We used the resources we had and we got creative. We were able to offer free legal advice, and people were able to come and get important paperwork filled out. And we were only able to do this because several community partners, including lawyers, notaries, and social workers, volunteered to come and offer up their expertise. And during this event, we even offered a free wedding for anyone that might be interested. And Pastor Raven and I were able to officiate the wedding of 2 women. And what I love most is, these 2 women didn't have any family that came to this wedding, but they had us. They had Harmony Creek Church. And on that day, at that wedding, 2 of our church members stepped up to be in the wedding party. And they stood with the 2 women during the ceremony. And it was a very powerful event. This was, I think, an amazing way to practice holy shrewdness. And we just have to remember it does take all of us to do this work. This Right to Love event was something that happened because we came together, not just with ourselves here at Harmony Creek Church, but we came together with people from all over the community. It truly was an amazing event. And I'm so proud of our church that we hosted that event. Going back to the parable, I think what Jesus is getting at with this complicated parable is that in a world where systems are stacked against the vulnerable, we're called to be shrewd in holy ways, shrewd in organizing for change, shrewd in using our resources, not for hoarding, but for sharing. Using our resources to do whatever we can to bring about as much heaven on earth as possible. That's what we're called to do. And I think that's what this parable is telling us. That's just one interpretation. And I want to close by us thinking once again about the manager in our story. And I want to say again what I said at the beginning. We think about what economics was like back in Jesus' time. And as I shared, the manager in this story, this shrewd manager, had been complicit in how things went wrong in the system. He was part of the problem. He had been part of the problem. But the thing is, he didn't let that stop him from doing what he could to still set things right. He didn't let that stop him from being able to be part of the solution. And it may not be fun to admit and to say, but we too, and I'm speaking for myself as much as anyone else, we too, at times, have been complicit in how things have gone wrong in our own country, in our own world around us. We too have been complicit. And that's I think it's important for us to admit that. We too don't always have it together. We too we too are complicit in how things have gone wrong. But I want to remind us, because I think the two examples I gave is a reminder to us that just because we have been part of the problem doesn't mean we can't be part of the solution. That shouldn't stop us from still rising up and doing whatever we can to set things right. And I don't know exactly what all that looks like, but just remember that we are called, I believe, to do whatever we can, my friends, in whatever ways we can to make a difference, to be part of the solution. And it is hard. It is so hard. But the world needs us. Our country needs us. Never forget that you too can make a change. You too, even if you've been complicit, even all of us, really, if we're honest with ourselves, all of us, I think, have been complicit in ways that have made things the way they are today. But that doesn't mean that the way things are today is the way things have to be. We can still make a difference. So let's go out and make a difference, like the song says. Amen, my friends. And may you always know that you are loved and you are God's beloved. And with great love comes great responsibility. So let's go out and be shrewd. Be like the shrewd manager. Be like shrewd Robin Hood. Let's go out and do whatever we can to set things right. Much love to all of you.